Hey, it's Chris, Legion Games. You ready? This is a lot of game. This is a lot of cooperative game. This is a lot of crowdfunding as well. What do you need to know? Talking about 4 asterisk games in this video. We have the currently crowdfunding, at the time of me filming this, Village Attacks, Grim Dynasty. Yeah, it's finally getting made. Okay, we'll get to that. Then we have Black Orchestra 2nd edition with the new expansion, the Resistance expansion, offering more modular content for this killing Hitler style cooperative game. You ready? Oh yeah. Then, on the lines of that, a lighter version of it, more streamlined if you will, the Valkyrie standalone game. And last but not least, we are also freaking talking about Synergic Games' Rise of Myths Cthulhu Roguelike Deck Builder. Is that enough game for you in one video? Oh yeah, you bet. Let's freaking go. We'll start with Valkyrie, the Black Orchestra standalone new game from Tabletop Tycoon. And this is a version of killing Hitler. In case you don't have 1 to 2 hours to do it with a regular Black Orchestra, you can now do it in a 30-minute or so version of this for 1 to 4 players. You're going to be maneuvering one of your co-conspirators around the various countries in Eastern Europe, trying to, well, take out Hitler at one of those 7 different venues that are available to you. As you take your actions, it's going to be dependent on, if I can actually see them, the dice that you're going to be rolling here with the 3 different sides. The targets, the arrows, and thankfully actually rolling all those dice, I didn't even get one of the eagles. And so those are representing the 3 things that can happen on your turn. You roll, you take your actions. That's it. And you go until you can kill Hitler, or you run out of the cards from the deck, or at the bottom of the board here, you can also kind of see you're going to be having these files that you can fill along the board in order to, well, lose in a different way. Interaction on this game is light. It's going to be dice dependent and a little bit driven by who can sort of pile on the right person at the right time at the right place situation. Because you need, essentially, to roll enough targets based on the location that Hitler is in to achieve victory. So for the theater here, I would need to roll 3. And you're going, oh, Chris, that sounds really simple and straightforward. You've got a limited inventory on your asymmetric co-conspirators here, and then you just got to get the items there and go. You just roll dice, Chris. What's so hard? Okay, so all of these bad things will happen. Like the venue here for this case, the terrace, gets flipped over. And now Hitler leads 5 of those icons rolled here. And you can see that all of these venues are double-sided. And so the yin and the yang, the dynamic, the tension of this game is based off of trying to maneuver around, gather randomly or not from these stacks of items that, again, go onto your conspirator cards that I mentioned in one of the spaces down below, then compiling them, having the item that you need to access Hitler at his location in the first place, which each of them requires a different one, and then having enough dice acquired as well, because although you get to roll 3 dice on the start of your turn for the most part, you don't actually have any dice available to you if you plot to actually kill Hitler in that way. And that's what it is, right? It's the plot action as the additional way of interacting. Because once you take that plot action, you need to have items, you need to have allies that are going to supply you with the necessary resources, or you just don't have enough. So all of a sudden, those 3 icons for the target that you're looking for to get the theater, well, if you don't realize that, well, you're only going to be rolling 3 dice, and you have basically 1 out of 3 chance on every die of getting it, that's not nearly as easy as it sounds. But that is the main mechanic that you're dealing with. It's luck-driven dice in all of these aspects. The other element of things, because no cooperative game will be complete without the bad guy turn, the overarching creep of the enemy in this sense, and that's represented mainly by the Black Eagle iron little thing that I mentioned here. And that goes straight to the bad guy cards, essentially, if you want to call them, right? And so these cards basically give you a dilemma of sorts with a limited communication effort. You have, if I actually hold it upright here, 3 options. And one of them is do something bad. Second one, do something bad. Third option, roll a die. If you can successfully roll the right side of the white, you don't have to do anything. However, you have a 50-50 chance of doing that. And so if you don't do it, then you have to do A and B. And so, for example, remove a file token, which can actually be helpful, but remove a venue token. Just remove one of these locations of the 7, so you just can't actually even have the hard side available to you. You just are basically screwed, and if you lose enough of those, it's going to be really freaking hard to actually have Hitler be in a place where you can target him in the first place. Or flip one of these over to the other side, and then discard one of your reroll tokens, your ever valuable reroll tokens, because you do get one reroll on your turn. But again, the trick with this game is you have to reroll all of your dice. So if you don't like that first roll of 3, well, you just have to roll all 3 again and take whatever you get unless you use one of the reroll tokens. And they're pretty valuable because they're really hard to come by. And so all of these then will also have an action at the bottom, which says move Himmler to Wilhelm Strauss. And so Himmler and Goebbels are moving around simultaneously, as well as Hitler on these cards that you're going to be doing. And where these take effect is, well, one, if you roll this dice, but also then if you end up, or you start your turn, I guess I should say, in a location with one of the 3 baddies, then you automatically have to draw one of these cards and resolve it as well. And that's the main dynamic. Otherwise, the actions, as it clearly illustrates on the board over here, which is absolutely fantastic, you get to move from space to space connected by the white line. You can randomly take an item from one of these item stacks, or you can look through the stack to see what's there in the first place. Now, the last thing, like the pandemic situation that you can do, you can share items between players, or you can utilize these ever necessary and awesome ally cards or tiles, if you will, because these are also where the targets come in. The arrows, as I just went through the list of actions, are just straight actions. However, the targets can be turned into actions, or you can use them for recruitment. If you have 3 in the pool, you get to take one of the 4 available little allies, which are really the asymmetric powers to make you have a chance in this game whatsoever. Give items, get extra actions, stop Goebbels and Himmler in the first place, move Hitler to other places, get additional dice for the plot that I mentioned earlier. All of those things play an effect. And why, for example, besides just not ending up in a place where Goebbels and Himmler are to draw additional cards, could be, well, beneficial. But also, if you plot to kill Hitler and you don't have the cards or the allies essentially to arrest those 2, get them out of the way, as you're rolling your dice, you actually roll 2 dice, 1 dice for each Goebbels and Himmler, that if it doesn't roll exactly the right thing, again, sort of like the cards, they actually remove one of your targets. So they act as shields for Hitler in that sense. And so the main mechanism, though, that you're going to be using to get those dice are, well, set items in the first place. They're going to offer you mitigation. They're going to offer you travel. They're going to offer you, well, the card access that you need in each of these individual locations to even attempt the plot. And then they also offer the ever awesome explosives and detonators. And those have to be combined in order to get 3 dice to use on the plot in the first place. The tricky part is, though, you get 1 roll on the plot, and then anything you used is lost, so you gotta make your 1 shot count. And that's the game in a nutshell. Is it as deep or complex as Black Orchestra? Hell no! Is it really gonna be probably enjoyable if you're looking for another step up cooperative game? No. This is a great, light, 30 or so minute cooperative game, family weight in that sense. I taught my 9-year-old it without any trouble whatsoever, and truth be told, he loved it. So much so that the next night we taught the 11-year-old. So much so that we played it again the following night for 3 nights in a row, right? That's the test of a game in my household, right? Do my kids request it again? Because this is a nice in-between. Because I have a lot of kids games that are just way too easy, and I have a lot of adult games, even like the loop here, that's just, I can't teach my kids the loop. The combo system, this is a beautiful sort of straddling the fence. And I usually don't like things that straddle the fence, because you don't necessarily get the awesome of this, you don't get the awesome of this. But in this case, it's a nice weight to say, okay, I can teach them this. It's still pretty luck and dice driven, more so than I would personally like in a game in that way, because there's not as much mitigation, but it does what it does and it does it well. So is it going to replace Black Orchestra? Hell no. Is it going to replace any of my other cooperative games? No. Am I going to keep it? Yes, my kids love it. And so, that is why we do things. Otherwise, pros, cons, again, like I illustrated, right? The con is the dice-driven, heavy aspect of this nature. The not knowing what you're going to get in the piles, having to waste an action to search. I like turning the targets into arrows if you don't need them. I like a little bit of the asymmetry that goes along with the co-conspirators here. Take any item when you're actually performing the search rather than just looking at them. During your turn, allies only need 2 instead of 3 on the recruitment track. Roll 4 dice instead of 3, and ignore enemies at your location. So these are nice. Wouldn't mind a few more of these. Again, the allies wouldn't mind a few more of those as well, but that's actually much of a lesser issue. And you know what? The other thing is it's a crapshoot. You will lose this game because things just roll bad for you, and you will utterly dominate because things actually work out. And that was the dynamic of our last 2 games, right? We almost lost on the file track because we just happened to get all of these cards and have bad situation after bad situation after bad situation with a few bad eagle rolls. And then the next game, we didn't really have to do this. Very little eagle rolls, people moving to the right places, grabbing the right explosives and detonators, and we actually won with just 1 file. We would have actually been winning on a hard mode situation with my 9 and 11-year-old, right? So that's how swingy this game could be, and that's probably the biggest boon or curse. So that is Valkyrie. Let me know what you think. Next game. Next, we're talking Rise of Myths Cthulhu from Synergic Games. Now, this is a prototype, so it's a very limited aspect of this roguelike deck-building cooperative game for 1 to 3 people. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be having these asymmetric decks of characters with their various abilities and utilizations. I have a sorcerer, a seer, possessed, as well as a detective here, which are all going to give you various ways of playing and dealing with the threats that you're slowly uncovering and having to tangle with as the eldritch horrors are slowly trying to destroy you. And so what you're going to be doing in this is it reminds me a little bit similarly of Kingdoms Forlorn in the sense that the main mechanism as first part of the game is based off of this location card right here. And as you're going on a turn-by-turn basis, rotating through who is the leader of this game, you are exploring using the map cards that will be drawn, placed out, and matched to create basically this little world that's going to be different every single time you run through. And you can see on even these 2 cards that there are several different types of icons that you are going to be dealing with as you're going along. You have shops, you have events, you have combat, and then you also have portals. And you're going to be interacting with all of these on a turn-by-turn basis as you traverse through them. And when you run into them for the first time, that activates said icon as well. And you're going to be slowly numbering these as you go along, and path mattering a lot, because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking this path and then using tokens upon tokens upon tokens to number them out so that you can tell, 1, where you've been, but 2, if you're having to cross over paths that you have already encountered along the way, it's going to cost you sanity and time. Mostly just sanity, though, because you have a card in your hand that represents both the health and the sanity of your character. And if anyone dies, you lose. And also, if they go lower than halfway down from their maximum amount, you start suffering penalties that are asymmetric for your unique individual character. And so those are the dynamics that you're going to be utilizing in the first phase. The second phase of things is going to be the meat and bones of this game as the deck building aspect. Because ultimately, if we take a half step back, what you're trying to do is find and then defeat the old one through a 6-round battling combat situation with the clever use of these cards in order to deal damage, defend yourself, and, well, deal with whatever other eldritch surprises they have along the way. Because there are events, as I mentioned, that'll be drawn. There are curses specific for the bosses as well. Now, I say this is a little bit more of a snapshot, hard to tell exactly what the end product is going to look like, because I have 4 characters. I have 4 including the old one. I have 4 of the 6 different levels of enemies that are available, and I only have 1 of the old ones as well. And they even say in the prototype, as a disclaimer, right, like, this prototype is a glimpsing
of what it is going to entail as a whole. Because of some of the nature that is not included with this, it's hard to tell because you're going to have points that you will gain at the end of every journey, run, whatever you want to call it, in order to upgrade your character, upgrade your deck. Because your deck actually starts out with a number of cards of common rarity based on the little icon down below here, and you're drawing, during the combat phase of things, 6 cards in order to combo-liciously create, well, how you're going to deal with the enemies that are brought before you. Because essentially what you've got going on here is you are guiding the Marvel Champions-esque vibe with a mechanical approach. Because depending on how many players you're playing with, you have character card aids here that tell you exactly what you're doing, how many enemies you're spawning, what the reward is, and everything else, even from a 1-player count in this setup, as well as a 2-player count. So 2 commons and a minion is my first combat phase that I'm going to be dealing with. And those get assigned out in front of you, and you're going to have to mitigate and deal with them based on the cards that you have available to you. Now, they aren't assigned specifically, sort of an open air market sort of situation. But the tricky part is these enemies, if I pull up a couple here, are going to be targeting specific characters based on the sanity, based on the health in the upper right-hand corner, so you can anticipate who they're going to be targeting, and they also have initiative there as the number telling you what order they're going to be going along in as well. The bottom part of the card indicates what they're doing exactly on their round, or their turn in the round. So round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4, round 5, round 6. And if you don't defeat them by round 6, you actually lose the game again. They're going to have shields to block your attacks, they're going to have conditions, and then the actual attacks that they're going to be doing, and then their health in the upper left-hand corner. And you can see as you're differing the levels here, you can see that there are differing values in terms of all of those sorts of things. And so as you're going along, you're going to be having to, well, figure out how many of these you're getting, use your rewards based on what you get, then to go to the shop, which allows you to, again, sort of the in-between, if you're familiar with any roguelike game, because you can buy health, you can buy sanity, or more importantly, and this is where the big crux of the game is, and this is where it's really a little bit hard to tell too, because I can't do it to the extent I want, because otherwise it's just run after run after run after run of losing right now before you even get to the old one. I think, it took me like 3 or 4 runs, and you can buy common cards, because I said I start with my starter cards, which is this pile of 12 cards. And then I can go and acquire one of my common cards, which are all of these. And these cards are, again, illustrated by the rarity in the lower left-hand corner. And the Marvel Champion comparison, apart from having the enemies out in the open, they're not assigned, which is different, but this is where it plays in. This is not only the cost of the card here in the upper left-hand corner, but this also indicates the energy that it's going to get me in order to play said cards. And so if I discard this card, it gives me 2 energy to play on one of the other ones. And so you have offensive cards, you have defensive cards, and you have just skill cards here represented by, as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, the yellow, red, and purple differences. And so you can see how these are doing things different. Add 1 attack and 1 defense to the cards with sacrifice. They reduce sanity instead of health this turn. The Blood Blade melee attack does 4, sacrifice 1. And then the Hematomines, I'm going to mispronounce that otherwise, melee attack and defense. Choose 1, attack 3 or defend 3. Choose 1, sacrifice 1 health or lose 1 sanity. And so all of these are going to be different ways they're going to be interacting, but you'll also have ones that won't even cost anything. Skill, deal 1 damage, regen 1 health. And so all of these characters give you different ways of mitigating and basically just creating your deck of how you want. And I don't know if you saw that at the bottom of the shop card, you can also trash a card from your deck, because that is one of the most important parts of any deck building game that needs to be included. And so you're going to be gradually just splaying out this map until you get to the old one, or you get through enough events that will trigger the old one, because you also have a very limited time on this run to make your map cohesive, to get through where you want, and to deal with all of the combat along the way, because combat is still the main driving factor, which then utilizes the main other mechanic of the deck building and the card utilization and the cleverness. And with the combat system, as you're playing your cards, you can take any number of actions and then tag in your partner to take any number of actions, and then they can tag you back and make the hot tag and rinse and repeat to take out those enemies, because they will do damage, they will hurt you, and you will get trounced the first couple times you play this, because you're not going to have as good of cards. These are starter cards for a reason. So again, incorporating some of these in really let me see a little bit more what the combo system can drive. And so that is my biggest concern with this game as a whole, of how you are managing the strengths of the enemies when they are proportionally coming out, because you want this to be tough, right? You want it to be achievable, but you also don't want it to feel pointless or overwhelming, because I also see this in Euro games in addition as one of my main criticisms for those. If I'm doing the same thing at the beginning of the game, every single game, why not just skip that portion and make it the more interesting portion? And so that's the dynamic of, both of these decks that I kind of have to leave in their hands to say, are you going to give me enough in here to make it interesting, so that I'm not just, slowly piecemealing all the interesting stuff from here and having to go through this rote repetition of grind too many times? Because with this being all card driven, as you can see on the table, it's not horrible. I mean, it's shuffle, 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 go repeatedly. But also, it's a fine line between a lesson in frustration of getting trounced a couple times versus feeling like you're making headway as well, because it is, just like any roguelike game, an uphill battle from the get-go. And that dynamic is precariously on the edge in this game, which I can't really speak to, because it's such a limited glimpse of the prototype, because there are a few corners that are kind of not included or cut in this version of things. I can't really tell you. Yes, I will say, all of these characters, the 4 different ones that I mentioned, between the sorcerer, the seer, the detective, and the possessed, they are significantly different. You will be having those elements. However, a lot of the cool stuff is still wrapped up in an enigma in the deck that you're going to have to get to. And so, because it's going to be so slow going, are you going to get to enough of it quickly enough in order to satisfy or quench your bloodthirst in order to defeat the old one? I think in the rulebook there says there's at least 3 old ones in the base game. And again, I've got 3 of the 5 different levels of minions. So again, how are those dynamics going to be different? Or is it going to be just, slight differences in the bottom right here? Now, some of these, as you can see, also have text that change the dynamics there. And again, the events, as well, just things that are going on round by round, a lot of them are combat in this prototype. And they initiate combat, but they just give you different scenarios of the combat. Characters lose a defense at the end of their turn at the first round. Combat grants no money rewards. Blah. Combat challenge. No character can play more than 2 cards of each type per turn. If you do it, you can remove 1 card from your deck for the rest of the game. However, if you fail, keep this card in the next shop. Everything else costs for 1. So these are kind of cool how they change things. But again, it's such a limited glimpse that I need to see more of how you can keep this fresh, varied, and not just feeling like it's a slight twist as you're going along. And similarly with Cthulhu here, right? He's tough, as you'd expect. But only having Cthulhu with the cards here in terms of basically a lot of the just different strengths, it's not terribly varied from overall some of the minions. And so again, it's going to be how much can you do with the other bosses to create a completely different asymmetric dynamic and, keep it fun at the same time, right? Fun, less grindy, uphill battle, and making cool combos in a deck building situation. I am, again, optimistically hopeful with this, but it's hard to give you a full impression based on the limited information apart from the decks, which seem more complete. And those are fun. But again, if I'm buying one of these cards for 2 gold and each combat's only netting me 2 gold, it's going to be a slow wean. And again, can you afford to get to the good stuff with any deck building game in order to utilize it when you're battling the enemies? So the overarching premise is very solid. The execution is going to be key with this one. And that's why I would say go check out the full rule book and more details, more details, more details to see those other elements that are missing here so you can tell. Again, a few things I didn't mention. You know, you've got extra relics that you're going to be having. And this is the other cool cooperative part that I didn't really talk about. But essentially what you've got with these synergic relics is that if you put energy into them, instead of using them for your cards, because maybe you don't have a good hand that turn, if you then fill it up, you can get additional different ability there. But if you're a partner, if one of your partners also has theirs filled up, you can activate not only the top condition, but the bottom condition as well. So that's a cool little feature. I really like that as sort of a shared mechanic between you and, you know, your cooperative friends. So I wouldn't mind seeing more things along this line that sort of separated out from a lot of the other cooperative games or even cooperative deck builders that we've seen. And so again, I think they're doing something very solid with the core here, but the grind and the repetition is going to be the smoothness that's necessary. Otherwise, you, dare I say, venture into a tainted grail ether field situation where it can feel a little bit overstaying its welcome or too much of the same in that regard, even though those, again, are completely different game mechanics as a whole, but that being the main criticism of them from the get-go. So that is a brief synergic snapshot of Rise of Myths. Again, solid, but wait and see right now. Optimistically hopeful with this one. So then we're moving on to Black Orchestra, the main course. If you understand Valkyrie in its simplistic distilled down version of Black Orchestra, this is going to make a lot of sense. Or if you're looking at Black Orchestra and saying, how does this differ? Well, let's lay it out from this original 2016 game as, again, trying to kill Hitler. Similar to Valkyrie, the commonality between these is you get 3 asterisks actions on a turn-by-turn basis. But as you can see on the board in front of me here, compared to Valkyrie, a lot more locations. Item distribution is vastly different. The dice rolling are a little bit of a twist of what Valkyrie does as well, with this giving you a few additional elements to increase the complexity, increase the strategy, increase the sort of, can I balance this on a knife's edge in order to actually thematically again kill Hitler, because the fleeting opportunities are going to present themselves, but albeit not maybe how or when you would like to ideally. So striking while the iron is hot with a heavily thematic incorporation of that sense of desperation as you are part of the Gestapo machine trying to, well, conspire within it in order to maneuver your character around the various places, number dependent, depending on how far, what phase of the game you're in, which is then driven by unique turn-by-turn events that will change the dynamic board state in the first place, all while managing similar conspirator cards alongside dealing with the Iron Eagle and the bad stuff, as we talked about with Valkyrie, where it's a choose your poison, if you will, in that regard, or go broke if you want to risk it and roll a die and see if you can avoid the consequences. Now, the additional elements in this that make this up are essentially on the player board themselves here. What you're using are cubes to represent how committed you are to the actual plot, meaning you have to manage that and be high enough up in order to even attempt a plot, unlike Valkyrie, where you just gotta be there in the right place and maybe have an item. Or you also are managing the suspicion, meaning, yes, you are creating waves with your actions that are not congruent with the Nazi Party rhetoric. The main thing being that you have these conspirator cards that are going to be, well, sort of your tableau. Not really your hand, there's no hand, but they're just in front of you and utilizable passives or one-offs. And you're going to be able to hold them accordingly as soon as you get up past the timid level, which is what you start at. You get up to the skeptical, and depending on the player count, you get either 5 or 6 or 4. And then motivated allows you an asymmetric ability. Committed allows you to actually plot and take the attempt to kill Hitler. Because if you miss, well, when you're going for the king, you best not miss, essentially, right? And reckless gives you an additional abandonment access, if you will, because as you're drawing some of these plot cards from the deck, you will have different requirements that are going to be needed in order to even take it in the first place, as well as additional elements to get those dice to roll, because the killing of Hitler remains the same of rolling the target symbols on the dice that are required. But differently than the location-based premise of Valkyrie, this is more dependent on the lower left-hand corner here of how strong Hitler's army is, and you having to overcome, which you can also decrease if you're playing your cards right. Badoom. Yes, literal pun, but also it's a figurative thing too. And there is a pick up and deliver element of this based on these items that you're seeing on the actual board, because this is also going to be how you're mitigating the suspicion that you are generating ad nauseum, essentially. As, again, you're working within the machinations of the system, but it is not going unnoticed by Hitler and all of his lieutenants, if you will. Because the same rules apply if you start in the same area as they do. Well, bad things. Roll the bad eagles. On this side, bad things. Now, this is the other twist, trick difference, is that you don't actually roll the dice necessarily. You have the actions that are available to you, and you know what? I give kudos in both of these games because it lays out half the rules down in the lower corners here. And I really like this, right? Attempting a plot runs you right through it. Then, how your actions are right here. Then, on your turn, the literal turn breakdown. And so I really like those elements just so that there is absolutely no confusion. The trick with the dice here in this game, or Valkyrie's departure from this, if you will, is you get 3 actions. However, you get the ability to roll dice to get additional actions, potentially, if you roll a number. However, you can also roll this, which is the descent die, and then you can also roll the Iron Eagle that I mentioned as well. And similarly, but also differently, when you're rolling a target, the descent actually allows you to grow up, if you will, and upgrade your character card to increase their motivation or to decrease Hitler's military support. And so those are the dynamics that you're going to be having to balance, you know, like a house of cards, because they're delicately falling over as Hitler and the minions are moving around by the bad cards, right? Because it happens, and it happens a lot. And unlike Valkyrie, you are limited to these spots, as you can see that they all have numbers on them correlating to the phase of the game you're in. And that is the part I haven't talked about yet, because you have these cards, these decks of cards, numbered 1 through 7, representing where you're going to be going. Now, thematically incorporated speaking, Hitler's power as things go through this deck decrease. So they don't actually necessarily get stronger straightforward. But Gestapo raids are happening more often because of his paranoia on his downfall. Consequently, you can actually lose if you just draw the wrong card in phase 7, so don't have that happen. Run out of cards, you'll lose. Everyone's in jail, you'll lose, because that's also the aspect of things, is if your suspicion level gets too high and a certain event happens, or certain triggers happen in this game too, you get sent to jail. Now in jail, you also have to draw one of the bad cards, which may also allow you to get out, but you may also pay a steeper price if you get out versus potentially staying in, but your cohorts can free you as well. But that's the balancing act that you're going to have to do. And at the end of every turn, this is the last thing you take, which is sort of an event. And sometimes they are slightly positive. Most of the time, they're just there to cripple you and to keep you on the edge or the brink of disaster, if you will. And there are a few key events in here that override in each of the rounds to give it sort of a different dynamic, because certain cards are then also ignored if the key event is out, or if the key event is not. And you go until, well, again, this is your timer, if you will, from a pandemic sense. So is it good? Yeah, this is freaking fantastic. You know, I really never had an interest in this game until recently. And then being able to acquire it in this May really kind of was nice. Now, the other element I didn't mention is that when you're picking up these items, again, this allows you to decrease your suspicion. Because, again, if you're actually doing the things the Reich needs to do as you're delivering these items from location to location based on what it says and where is open, you also open up these spots that allow you to mitigate some of the other aspects of things in terms of motivation and suspicion in either ways, especially as the game progresses and you can traverse more locations. But that also means that Hitler maybe can slip out of your grasp or go someplace that you can't get easily. And that's where all of the awesomeness of these cards and the conspirators of items across the board give you ways to mitigate. They give you all of the awesome asymmetricness along with the plots in order to mix and match and eventually create your dice pool to, you know, swing for the fences at the very end of the game. So what do I think of this? I did my 25 top cooperative games last year, and truth be told, this one will slot in that list when I redo that later in 2025. It was a game that I had on my radar for a long time, but truth be told, I'm not a big historic buff. But again, what do I say? Theme is nice. Gameplay always triumphs over theme. And so that's essentially what we've got going on here for me personally speaking. I am a little concerned with the randomness with this and Valkyrie. It does get a little samey in some of the optimization and some of the actions. It can, after about half a dozen plays. So that is a small minor feature because, the main thing that's changing are the cards that you're drawing and the item setup, which isn't terribly different, but the spots on the board, again, just like with Valkyrie, are the same. So it'd be nice if there was a little bit of variability there, but is it a make it or break it? No. This is definitely more of a balancing act. It's definitely more of a curve in terms of difficulty than obviously Valkyrie, but obviously also something slightly harder or higher than a Pandemic, if you will, as well. So it does fit in there kind of nicely. It's not nearly as hard as some of the other cooperative games. It's not nearly as random as some of the other games. But it fits a niche within a niche, and I like the scaling events. I like the expanding presence. But ultimately, the biggest make it or break it is the Hitler slipping out of your grasp, or it coming down to just a dice roll that you really, again, can't mitigate as much as you want, and that can be ultimately anticlimactic as a whole, especially when this game, unlike Valkyrie, may take you an hour and a half. So it's not just a simple rinse and repeat and set the board back up again. And so it can be a little deflating at the same time, even though the thematic incorporation and what people tell me always, right, is that the journey and the experience are what we care for. So quick pros and cons for Black Orchestra. I like the asymmetric co-conspirators. I wish there was a slight more asymmetry there, but it works. I like the plots. I like them being different. I like them giving more elements to be able to match. I'm still not as huge a fan as the anticlimactic dice roll endgame situation sometimes. And also balancing this one out as a little bit of a harder game, a little bit of a longer setup, and a little bit of just, you can kind of have your feet swept out from under you if you roll bad at the end. It is a little bit off-putting at times if you've invested this much effort, time, concentration, and balancing between the suspicion and the motivation and the war track, and then it all comes down to just a dice roll, right? And so that's probably the biggest disconnect overall, archingly, than anything else. At the same time, right, the conspirator cards are really cool. The making bad choices is always the sort of sadistic, masochistic element of these games that if you like co-op games that are hard, that it really brings out. And so I enjoy that. I can also see people who are looking for more of a pandemic weight aspect, this being too much in too many ways of that with all of the features that you're doing. Don't hear me and say it's too complex either. The dynamics are what you're keeping track of. The mechanistic approach is very straightforward. I mean, the fact that you can lay it out on the side of the board illustrates that in the first place. And I really do like the growing area of I have access, they're going to spread out, it's going to be harder to get there, I'm going to have to risk more actions, more suspicions, and while keeping my motivation up and also staying out of jail because it's a real looming threat based on the randomness of those event cards. But again, as cool as the event cards are to keep things spiced up and you don't use every one in every single game, that is also going to be the other random element that can screw you or not, that similarly to the dice rolling situation, if you're not a fan of that, this is not going to be of interest to you either. So then you're maybe wondering, when we're talking about the new expansion Resistance here, what does that actually add? And we have 3 modules of varying degrees of difficulty, varying aspects of modifying the base game that we just talked about, and giving you just a little bit more of the good stuff as well, right? And so first off, the first module adds what we call the resistance board here. And the resistance board offers you missions in the form of additional ways to mitigate a lot of what is available. And so, that was actually kind of cool how it flipped up there, but what that essentially means is there's going to be 3 different types of tokens that are going to give you access to missions as you place them down on the board. However, if the minions get there, they actually take it off the board. So you can potentially lose the mission unless there's more than 1 token down. And here you can see an example of what a mission is. Okay, get arrested and get released. Set your suspicion to low as the reward, take a discarded item. Lower Hitler's military support by 1 if you win. Go to Warsaw and discard intel. There can't be any deputies present. And again, there's a lot of these. Whoops, token. And this is actually what some of them look like. And so what the main point, though, apart from the actual reward on the bottom of the card, apart from the mission that you need to accomplish, the real kicker with this is it gives you a die for your plot additionally later on. So the more of these you can do, the more dice you're going to have available to you. Then the second portion of things adds to the difficulty. And imagine if, for example, we remove this for a second, now that these deputies are not just aimless, wanderless sort of idiots, if you will, because now we add a new investigator board of things, and it gives you basically an enemy here. Officer Kopkow goes after you with a degree of suspicion. You have to go after the highest conspirator, the person with the highest suspicion. Meaning at the end of your turn, it adds a new element of moving this character as another deputy that is chasing after the person with the highest suspicion. Now you have ways to mitigate, but if you get caught, you go to jail, right? Again, jail's bad. So it gives you an additional degree of difficulty that you're going to have to mitigate if you thought this game was too easy in the first place. And then the last portion of things are the allies here. Again, giving you a new action, new asymmetric abilities of these tiles that you will then recruit and place along the side in order to take their actions that they're going to give you. So very similar to Valkyrie in that sense, if I can actually turn them right side up here, and then giving you ways again to more mitigate as well as deal with those random events and actions that may, thematically speaking again, cause Hitler to escape your grasp at the very worst possible time. It changes the dynamic of a few of the other actions, including the items where there will be 2 of these on every single spot, and you can basically flip them over to see what's there as an action. But recruiting these in the first place is also dice dependent, so unless you roll one of those 3 numbers on the dice, then you fail, and then suspicion is raised or increased. So what do I think of resistance? Well, frankly speaking, I really like the allies. The allies are the best part of Valkyrie expansion. Getting those in there, incorporating them, getting the craziness and the combos and creating what you can out of what's given. And so this is probably the most essential one of them. I mean, I like the missions too. The missions are probably 1A to 1B, if you will, because I want more ways to get dice to win the game, right? And so, personally speaking, as someone who is a bad gamer in the first place, I don't need necessarily as much a module to make the game harder in that way, with someone actively, smarter, chasing after me, if you will, as I'm trying to delicately balance all of the other things that are going on. And so if this game was too easy, that's probably going to be higher on the list for the 3 of them for you. Now, I didn't mention, but all of these actually add more cards as well. They offer more of these good cards, and they also offer more of the event cards. So they change the dynamics in a few of those to interact with the elements that I just mentioned in addition. So is it an absolute essential expansion? No, but if you like Black Orchestra, or you're looking at it, like I said, where it's gotten a little bit stale after half a dozen plays, this will definitely add it without adding significant complexity, and that's kind of what you want out of an expansion in the first place. But, you know, do you like buying an expansion to fix issues with the base game as well? So that's the dynamic. If it's already playing, if it's already hitting the table, it's already one of your favorite co-ops, it's probably a really good fit. If it's, okay, I like this game, it's probably not going to change your mind with any of these dynamics because it keeps the core elements of things mostly the same, but does offer you some mitigation, FYI, and so might twist your arm a little bit and make you like it just a little bit more too. So last up here, we have Village Attacks with some Grim Dynasty Reborn thrown in. Now, if you're not familiar with Village Attacks, what we're talking about here is a reverse tower defense game. You are the baddies. You are on your tiles defending the castle so that the villagers and the pillagers and the tacticians and the heroes can't actually knock down the walls, you know? And so what you're doing in sort of a keep the heroes out vibe, if you're familiar with that game and you're not familiar with this one, is, well, just overcoming the waves and waves of mobs that are assaulting you on a turn-by-turn basis. Now, it has a Cthulhu Death May vibe feel. Again, if you're not familiar with this game in the first place, those are probably the 2 combination smatterings that this one may remind you of. And you're going to be spawning these peasants and these townsfolk and these hunters as they gradually spawn and then make their way towards the center, trying to take out your heroes along the way, but ultimately just trying to take out the actual center of the castle, the heart of the castle, if you will. And all of these unique scenarios, again, similar to Cthulhu and Keep the Heroes Out, are giving you just different setups, different variability, different everything to go along with that. Base game, plus then the expansion Grim Dynasty. And Grim Dynasty here is giving you, I believe, about like 17 more scenarios. Because the great thing about this tower defense situation, right, is it's you go, enemy goes. Aren't familiar with it otherwise? Well, all you do is you roll your dice here, you take the symbols that you've got, you allocate them to your ability boards here, and then rinse and repeat. Melee attacks, magic damage, healing, moving, ranged attacks, special abilities. All of those things. Buying trap cards and setting the trap cards out in the various rooms to stop your enemies along the way or to cause them to falter as they're trying to overwhelm you. There are layers to this game though, because it also incorporates an event system where on a round by round basis, you then draw a new event card to give a different vibe or feel. And this will not only behoove you, it will hurt you, but it may also just be some chaos. And we'll talk about what Grim Dynasty does in that way here in a second. But you really have to understand the base game to understand what Grim Dynasty is bringing to the table in the first place. I do like the fact that, as you can see on the table here, the miniatures fit nicely into the areas. This is not a Cthulhu Death May Die situation where I can't fit everything on the tiles. So it actually works better in that regard. But as I mentioned about the events, what you're going to be doing is moving the event tracker on this little dial here, indicating that when you pass a certain mark, you draw a new event. Your heart of your castle will have your health, and then the village morale will sometimes be another way that you have to win by just killing them enough, right? Okay, yeah, right. This is all about the killing. And most of your basic enemies are going to have 1 health, but as you're drawing cards on a round by round basis to the spawn points that are on the board, wherever they may be, you're going to be slowly spawning more of the different types of enemies. And that's sort of the boon and the curse is in the base game. There's really only about 3 different types of people that you're going to be dealing with. And the heroes are nice because then you pull a chit out of the bag and you assign them a characteristic, and the characteristic interacts again with your player characters here because each of them are going to have a type that they're going to be, and then if your type matches the enemy type, more damage is had, and you are more vulnerable and susceptible to similarities. And let me talk about, really a second, the best part of this game. The best part of this game, and it goes back to the character cards, right? The enemies, or the bad guys. I mean, the enemies are actually good because they're good. Anyway, you know what I'm saying. And what I'm talking about here is, as you can see on the board in and of itself, is that you have, okay, the type, you have the how much it takes to level up the experience, you have your health, you have the dice that you can allocate in the middle, you know, your defense dice, your reserve dice, and your movement dice. And because these dice spots right here can be used later, you can save them, which is nice. However, the best part of this game is this center leveling up aspect of things, right? Because what you can do is if you kill stuff, and when you kill stuff, you get experience. But this is the best part. This is the best part. This is the best part. Cannot understate this. Is leveling up and getting these additional abilities that slot in on the side, because these abilities right here, these abilities are the most awesome part of this game. This is the reason you play this game in the first place, is because of the crazy, combo-licious, awesome abilities that you can have, not just with your character, but with your group of characters, because that's the other sort of, you gotta be careful of. You gotta choose carefully. You can't just choose all the cool ones. You need to actually have a balanced group of things. And that's not such a challenge when you're playing at lower player counts. That's not such a challenge when you've got just like the base game, but you really can't choose all of the types of characters that you may want. Otherwise, you have to be a little bit selective if you've got more than one in that regard. And that leads me into the downside of this, because as you'll notice when I pull this back up here, that all of these abilities have little icons on the right side, and that correlates to the dice, and the dice being the biggest divisive element here overall, because they're awesome. You can activate them, you can get them. But the problem with dice in this game, in like a lot of other games, in many games that are often using this mechanism, is the ability to mitigate, the ability to deal with. And there's not really a great way to necessarily do that as much as you want in this game. So you kind of get what you get and you don't throw a fit, as we say to our kids. And so that's the biggest Achilles heel of this as a whole, because you just get stuff that's, not good, and you just kind of, because you can also roll the little pitchfork here, which means you got to move one of these guys. Now, truth be told, moving one of these guys sounds like a bad thing. Oh no, they're getting closer to the center, Chris. Oh, well, I didn't roll any ranged attacks this time. I only rolled melees, but I don't want to use one of my moves. Oh, I get to move them towards me, and then I can take them out. So, I mean, there is that element of things, and you can reserve dice, and if you get 3 of a kind, you can reroll. But again, it's not one of the game's strengths by any means. And that's also to speak with the fact that, when you're reserving those dice for later use, I only have 8 dice total. So if I have any number of characters, right, like it's, that's not great when I'm limited in that aspect. Sort of like if you run out of miniatures in a game like this, that is just something that should never happen. So a game that is dice dependent, I should have plenty of freaking dice. The other downside of this is that there is just a lot of upkeep as well. There's a lot of remembering this icon, this status, this village morale, this village event, all of the asymmetry, all of the aspects of moving them. I mean, there's a lot of things and characters on the board. So there's a lot of, I'm just having to remember do all of these individual things. And then also a minor thing, right? Like some of these rooms have abilities, and which ones are which and which ones do what, and how do I remember that? I gotta go look it up again. So again, minor things in a game situation with the dice and the locations and some of the upkeep, but it's enough to break an immersion of a game that otherwise is very thematically engaging in the first place. And you don't want to be torn out from that and have a disconnect there, because it kind of doesn't ruin the experience, but it kind of makes you go, crap. And you know what? We got to talk about it, because most games will also say, hey, you know what? If this is equal, you just decide. In this game, it's like, hey, if things are equal, flip a coin. Which, again, we just house ruled and did the other. So again, minor thing, but just kind of like, right? Another just one of those elements that I wish it just wasn't there in the first place, as ever minor as it is. The rule books will run you exactly through what the scenarios are offering. They'll tell you how long the game is, or so, as well as the difficulty and the setup and the variable conditions, including, all of the tiles and all of the trinkets that go along with it. So, I mean, that's really nice. It's really well laid out for the scenario side of things. At the same time, again, it's a little bit samey, except it's not samey, if that makes sense. So this is what you need to be looking at as the main gist of things before we talk about the Grim Dynasty and what this is offering. Because I'll say this in a short and sweet as I can. This game desperately needs an expansion to get the legs that you may want out of it. Again, like I mentioned in the base game, you've got like 3 different types of enemies. It's going to be very same. You're going to have a different setup. You're going to have a slightly different scenarios, but it's going to feel very same. And the longer the runs are, it does grind and grate just a little bit in terms of the repetition. And so if you don't mind that, and you like the flow, and you like getting into it, and then you like steamrolling, yes. Can it overstay though? Yes. And that's what you need to be aware of. There's enough scenarios here, but this expansion, this small expansion, literally over doubles the amount of scenarios that are available to you with one expansion. It also doubles the amount of heroes. It also, as I knock that down, we're just going to leave that in there. It also doubles the amount of bad guys that you may be dealing with, because it gives you several different elements that you're going to be taking into account. One, I sort of alluded to it earlier. This is the tactics board. You now roll another set of dice. And depending on how many of these dice you roll, which is based on, how many of these little tacticians, these little white ones here are on the board, well, you roll more dice. Then you do whatever ability you can, matching up. More dice, bad things happen. And that's offering an additional element, because they also sort of hide in the shadows behind your other ones. They don't move forward as much. So you're going to have to wade through your enemies in order to get to them in the first place. Then we have the ever dangerous, ever present Dragon Clan. Dum. But the Dragon Clan has 3 different types as well. The head, the claws, and the body. And you're going to be having to deal with different types of the Dragon Clan as they spawn if you draw 2 hunter cards in a row. And then they spawn and they sort of build up as well in different ways, because you have to take out the head first, but it's really hard to take out the head even though it has 1 health because of the defense. But then the claws will actually stack up, and the more of them that are out there, the more individual they damage deal. And so those are the elements that are going to be present with that. And then the third element, and I'm going to totally mispronounce this, so we will just go to the rule book here a second instead. And here you can see the rule book. It's the Magwe. I'm mispronouncing it, I know, I'm sorry. But essentially, if you're familiar with the trolls in the base game from the event deck, something comes onto the board, smashes things across the way that you're doing. And so these are little demon imps that essentially cause bad things. And overarchingly, though, they're just bad for you. Now, they can damage your village enemies, but most of the other sides of the dice are going to do things like removing traps, attacking you, removing those dice that we talked about that you get to put in reserve, activating a villager and moving the villager. And so they're agents of chaos, but they're really just agents of I hate you and I'm going to make the game harder in that way. And so the main issue, or the main thing that this Grim Dynasty expansion brings, is it brings a significant degree of difficulty in those ways of adding those elements. And again, it sort of addresses the problems with the base game of not having enough differing enemies in that regard, and adding a few more heroes that are going to be mixed and matched into it as you're spawning and not having the same ones every single time. But ultimately, again, it gives you more of the good stuff as well. But therein lies the problem is, you know, I almost feel forced to say, I really felt like I needed the expansion to give this game the legs I wanted, not because I need the difficulty, because I'm a horrible gamer, right? Like I lose almost every time I play these types of games, but to make me feel like I personally want more out of that grind. And so that's my suggestion. And that is also a dilemma, because I hate saying, hey, if you really want the best experience with the game, buy an expansion, right? We all have those games that have done that for us, but I always feel mixed endorsing that as the way to go because of the consumerism of the hobby. And again, I feel like base games should be well enough contained that isn't necessary. It's just whipped cream and the cherry on the top. So again, your mileage may vary. And I know plenty of times, myself personally, and you've probably done the same thing of buying an expansion and really making it that much better. I mean, I can think of a couple games off the top of my head, like Veil of Eternity and Space Base, that, you know, absolutely have done that. But I do not like that being the rule. That is the exception. And so I always put an asterisk with that. There you go. Too much time talking about way too many games in one video. Hopefully helpful, hopefully discerning. And, well, you can let me know what you think. Comments, questions, or concerns down below. Peace out. Great freaking day. Have it. See you later.